In 2020, the palace did not need a dramatic decree. It needed 2 letters to change meaning. HRH. Harry and Meghan would keep the style, but no longer use it. Public royal funding would end. Official duties would stop. The working royal map shifted from palace balconies and military uniforms to Canada, then California. Then the clock runs backward. 1936. Edward VIII gives up the throne, becomes Duke of Windsor, and Wallis Simpson is denied the same HRH status. The couple spend much of the rest of their lives outside Britain, especially in France. The parallel has limits. One was a king who abdicated, one was a prince stepping back from royal work. Still, the machinery around them looks familiar. Rank narrowed, money separated, distance created from the crown. So the question is not whether there was a secret file marked exile. It is whether, when a royal leaves duty but still carries royal power, the monarchy reaches for the same tools again. Before the pattern becomes too neat, it needs guardrails. Edward VIII was the king, the head of state, and his abdication created a constitutional emergency. Harry was not the monarch. He remained a prince, remained in the line of succession, and stepped away from being a working royal in a very different media world. This is not an argument that Harry is Edward, or that Meghan is Wallis, or that 2020 replayed 1936 scene for scene. The useful comparison is the machinery that closes in around them. When a royal leaves the daily discipline of duty, but still carries the glow of royal identity, where does that person sit in relation to the sovereign? In both cases, the answer moves through 3 levers: status, the public signals of rank, especially HRH; money, who pays, who depends, and who can claim independence; geography, how far the former insider is kept from the royal centre. Those are the 3 threads we can follow. The first begins in the crisis that made the monarchy fear a famous royal outside the palace gates. The first version of that fear arrived in December 1936. Edward VIII had been king for less than a year. He was popular, visible, and wrapped in the symbolism of the crown. But his determination to marry Wallis Simpson collided with the political, religious, and constitutional limits of the monarchy. As king, Edward was head of state and, at the time, supreme governor of the Church of England. His private choice became a public problem for the government, the church, the dominions, and the institution around him. On December 10, 1936, Edward signed the instrument of abdication. The next day, he told the country by radio that he could not carry the burden of kingship without the woman he loved. It is remembered as a romance. For the institution, it threatened the whole line of succession in public view. His brother became George VI almost overnight. A shy second son now had to look inevitable, and the monarchy had to persuade the public that the center had moved cleanly and permanently. But Edward did not vanish. He still had the face of a monarch, international fame, supporters, social access, royal habits, and the glamour of someone who had once been sovereign. That was the problem. A former king outside duty, still carrying the emotional residue of the crown. The romance story kept the spotlight. The institution saw a containment problem. Edward became Duke of Windsor, royal but clearly below the new king. His finances had to be negotiated. His access to Britain and royal life became sensitive because every appearance could invite comparison with George VI. Geography mattered too. Edward and Wallis spent much of their lives outside Britain, especially in France, far from the balcony where legitimacy was performed. Here, the 3 tools take shape: narrowed status, managed money, and created distance. And the first tool can be reduced to 4 letters on a page: HRH. Those 4 letters matter because status inside a monarchy is never just decoration. HRH, His or Her Royal Highness, tells governments, charities, military units, photographers, and the crowd behind the barrier how close someone stands to the sovereign. It turns a name into an instrument of the crown. After 1936, Edward became His Royal Highness the Duke of Windsor, still royal, still titled, but no longer king, and visibly below his younger brother. The man who had occupied the center was moved onto a lower rung. Wallis was treated differently. When she married Edward, she became Duchess of Windsor, but she was not granted the style Her Royal Highness. That withheld form of address became one of the sharpest boundaries around the couple. Edward could keep a royal identity. Wallis could not appear to have entered the full inner circle of the crown. Now look at 2020. Harry and Meghan were not stripped of every title. They remained Duke and Duchess of Sussex. They also retained their HRH styles. But under the terms announced after Sandringham, they would no longer use them as working members of the royal family. It sounds technical, but the public signal changes. On paper, the letters may remain. In practice, they stop leading the brand. Then came another status cut. When the exit became permanent in 2021, Harry's honorary military appointments were returned to the Queen, including Captain General of the Royal Marines. These were ceremonial links between a prince and institutions serving under the crown. Removing them narrowed the space where Harry could appear as an active representative of royal service. So the first tool appears in both cases, under very different circumstances. Edward is turned from king into duke. Wallis is kept outside the HRH circle. Harry and Meghan stop using HRH in public royal life. Harry's formal military links are removed. Status is edited line by line. Then comes the harder question. Who pays for the life that remains? Royal money is never just money. It funds staff, travel, offices, security arrangements, and the machinery that turns a person into an official public figure. It also ties that person to rules. What they can say, where they can appear, which causes they can represent, and how closely their public identity stays attached to the crown. After Edward abdicated, the financial line had to be redrawn. He was no longer sovereign, but he was still famous, royal, and capable of pulling attention from George VI. His finances became part of the settlement, negotiated, sensitive, and bound up with how visible the Duke of Windsor should be. An allowance was not only support for a former king, it defined his relationship to the new reign. In 2020, the same lever appears in modern form. Harry and Meghan said publicly that they wanted to become financially independent. The phrase promised freedom from palace funding, but also meant leaving the protected economy of working royal life. Under the terms announced after Sandringham, they would stop receiving public funds for royal duties through the sovereign grant. Once they were no longer working royals, the old bargain no longer applied. Public money for public service under the crown. That gave them room to build an independent life. It also pushed them into a harsher marketplace. Books, podcasts, streaming projects, speaking deals. These became the practical answer to a structural problem. Outside the royal funding system, a royal-sized public life needs outside money. Independence then becomes complicated. The palace can say, "You are free to earn your own money." But when a former working royal earns that money through a story, a title, a grievance, or a memory connected to the monarchy, control returns as a question. Who owns the royal brand when someone has left the institution but still carries its name in their biography? For Edward, money helped keep the former king dependent and contained. For Harry and Meghan, financial separation removed one dependence and created another. Dependence on public attention, private contracts, and an audience large enough to sustain them. The second tool is not simply a cutoff, it transfers pressure. The ledger moves away from the palace. The pressure does not disappear, it changes shape. And once the money arrows leave the center, the map begins to matter. For the monarchy, London is more than a capital. It is the stage where royal legitimacy is performed. Palace gates, state carriage, church service, balcony. Proximity tells the public who is inside the working system and who is not. After the abdication, Edward and Wallis spent much of their life outside Britain, especially in France. That distance kept the former king away from the daily theatre of George VI's reign and from rituals where cameras might turn a family visit into a political comparison. Exile was never only about miles. It was about reducing occasions, fewer official appearances, fewer shared platforms, fewer moments where a royal outside duty could look like an alternate source of royal authority. In 2020, geography changed again. Harry and Meghan first moved to Canada, then to California, far from royal duties, royal households, and the central calendar of monarchy, but not far from global media power. That is where the old tool begins to crack. In Edward's world, distance could shrink a royal figure. Newspapers and radio mattered, but exile narrowed the stage. In Harry and Meghan's world, distance can become a platform. A person can be outside the balcony and still appear on millions of screens. So the third tool is distance. Physical, social, symbolic. It moves the former insider away from the royal centre, but in the digital age, it cannot guarantee that the centre is the only place people are watching. Placed beside status and money, the pattern is harder to miss. These are not three random punishments, they work together. Together, the three tools draw a bright line around the crown. Not around fame, not around family, but around legitimacy. Monarchy is not built to share its centre. In the British system, royal authority flows from one place at a time, the reigning sovereign. Everyone else is arranged around that centre, with rank, duties, funding, uniforms, balcony appearances, official tours, and public language telling the country who speaks for the institution. That is why the three levers matter. Status asks, are you publicly carrying royal authority? Money asks, are you dependent on and accountable to the royal machine? Distance asks, how close are you to the rooms, rituals, and calendars that make monarchy feel continuous? When those answers blur, the institution reacts. A famous royal outside normal duty does not need to declare a rival court to create a problem. The risk is visual before it is constitutional. Two centres of attention, two royal narratives, two versions of service, two places where cameras gather. This is the pattern linking Edward after 1936 with Harry and Meghan after 2020. The legal details differ because the crises differed, but the institutional instinct rhymes. Reduce signs of official status, separate finances, widen the space between the person and the sovereign centre. No cartoon villain is required, just an old institution protecting the rules that make it legible. Here is the uncomfortable part. Containment can be rational for the crown and still devastating for the people contained by it. On paper, it clarifies authority. In real life, it turns family roles into public boundaries, homes into strategic distance, and personal rupture into a constitutional signal. The playbook is not best understood as simple revenge. It is a survival mechanism. But survival mechanisms have victims, and in the 21st century, the person pushed outside the palace gates may no longer disappear from view. Here, the old exile system meets the machine it was never built for. In Edward's world, exile still meant literal distance. A duke in France could be photographed, written about, whispered about in drawing rooms and newspapers. Radio could carry his voice. But the machinery was slower, narrower, easier for governments, editors, and palace officials to pressure or contain. By 2020, distance no longer meant disappearance. It meant a different stage. Harry and Meghan did not leave into silence. They left into a global attention economy built for confession, counter-narrative, and replay. An official palace statement could define the working monarchy. No public funding, no use of HRH in practice, no formal royal duties. Then came the outside story. The Oprah interview, a podcast series, streaming projects, public speeches, and Harry's memoir, Spare. Those public accounts are not court findings or official records. They are claims, memories, arguments, and curated narratives. But that does not make them powerless. In a media system that rewards intimacy, the personal version can travel faster than the institutional version. So the palace gained one kind of control and lost another. It could clarify who stood on the balcony as a working royal. It could draw the legal and financial boundary around the crown. It could not make the people outside that boundary stop speaking, publishing, filming, or being listened to. That changes the meaning of exile. In 1936, distance helped shrink a former king's official significance. In the 21st century, distance can become a studio, a book tour, a streaming deal, a microphone. The modern dilemma is sharp. The same boundary that protects the monarchy can look like punishment. And the same freedom that lets an exiled royal tell their story can look, from inside the palace gates, like a rival court forming in real time. So when the noise drops away, the evidence board has to answer one narrow question. What exactly have we proved? After the noise, the proof is narrower than the myth and stronger because of it. There is no evidence here of a secret palace document marked Exiled Playbook. There is no need to invent one. What the record shows is a repeated institutional reflex. When a royal leaves the work of the crown but keeps the glow of royal identity, the system reaches for the same three levers. Status is limited, so the public knows who speaks for the sovereign. Money is separated, so dependence and authority are no longer blurred. Distance is created, so the royal center remains visible as the center. In 1936, those tools helped clear space for George VI. In 2020, they helped define the working monarchy after Harry and Meghan stepped back. The contexts were different, the mechanism repeated enough to matter. That is the cost of the crown's survival. The boundary may protect the institution, but it can harden a family fracture into public architecture. Inside and outside, balcony and exile, silence and microphone. The monarchy can still decide who stands beside the sovereign. What it cannot decide, anymore, is whether those left outside are heard. So the final question is not whether exile happened before, it did. The question is whether exile can still silence anyone.